Jesus passes by the fig tree. It was not time for the figs to bud. Had leaves, but no figs. He looks at it, and he cursed it. This is one of those times he's operating in his divinity. He is exercising his supremacy, and what he wants to see in this fig tree is fruit produced. The fact of the matter is that the fig tree didn't have fruit because it was not in season. Jesus, in his divinity, walks by the fig tree and expects to see fruit on it, but fruit on the fig tree would have went against the law of the season, because it wasn't the season for the fig tree to produce fruit. The fig tree should have recognized, this is God in the flesh walking by me. Let me produce fruit because he's expecting me to. It ain't the right season. It ain't the right time. But just because he has an expectation, let me produce fruit. There was another instance. The fig tree didn't recognize God's divinity. Jesus left the scene, went into the temple, and guess who else didn't recognize his divinity? The people that was in the temple. They didn't recognize the divinity of Christ, so they kept on doing what they were doing. They kept on with their money transactions and all their junk that they were selling in the temple. And Jesus, not in his humanity, he operates in his divinity and turned the tables over. And gets a whip and whip these guys out of there. And he tells them, my house. You can't say my house unless you are supreme in that house. They didn't recognize his divinity. I'm going to tell you who else didn't recognize his divinity. Israel didn't. Because they didn't recognize the divinity of Christ, they continued in their transgressions. And therefore, they became cursed just like the fig tree. How does something that's blessed become cursed? I'll tell you how. Because Jesus' judgment on the fig tree testified to his authority to judge Jerusalem and the world. Something that's blessed becomes cursed when it goes against the law of God. Not only the law of God, God's expectations of it. Many people are operating under a curse because they're not meeting up to the expectation of the divine God, the supreme God. Are you living beneath God's expectations? Because when you are living beneath God's expectations, it'll produce a curse in your life. Why? Because we are covenant people. The fig tree was supposed to recognize the divinity of God and do according to the expectation of Christ. Are we recognizing God? Are we recognizing Christ as God? Are we recognizing him in our life, in his divinity, in his supremacy, that he is the king and he has an expectation of us to produce, even if it ain't the right season? I'm still producing. Why? Because Jesus is walking by. And I recognize him. My soul recognizes him. My body recognizes him. My mind recognizes him. My whole being recognizes the Christ is in the room. How many times do we go to church and people will sit there like they don't recognize that Jesus is in the room? Not meeting the expectation of Christ.